Naima.
Naima, the company's gone. My authority, everything I owned, it's all gone. Everyone at this level is replaceable. Don't make it emotional. Just one night inside.
6 months from where this story starts, I would be sitting at my own marble table, in my own home, wearing nothing dramatic, just silk the colour of champagne, eating a dinner I cooked myself, when I would hear a fist hit glass. I would look up and see him standing on the other side of a rain-soaked door, water running off his jaw, his mouth shaping my name like it still meant something to him. Beside him, holding onto his sleeve like it was the last dry thing in Chicago, would be the woman he replaced me with. I want you to remember that image. Hold on to it, because we are not there yet. That is the last page, and I am going to make you earn it the way I had to. This begins 11 months earlier, on a Tuesday, with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand while I read a compliance report that was about to save $140 million. And a husband who didn't know my name was the only thing standing between his family's empire and a very quiet, very expensive collapse. For 6 years, I was married to Jihoon Kang, and for 4 of those years, I was also the head of risk and compliance for Crown Meridian Group, the hospitality and real estate arm of the Kang family name, a name that opened doors in Seoul, in Singapore, in Chicago, in rooms where the velvet rope wasn't a suggestion, it was a verdict. People assume that when a woman marries into a family like the Kangs, she becomes decoration. A ring, a name, a seat at the right end of the table. I let people assume that. It was useful. What they didn't know, what Jihoon himself sometimes forgot, on his more careless days, was that I had built my career for 11 years before I ever wore his ring, and I did not stop building it after. I had spent 4 years at Voss Sterling Advisory before Crown Meridian recruited me directly. Not through Jihoon, not because of Jihoon, but because a private bank in Singapore trusted my signature more than they trusted most law firms. When Crown Meridian wanted access to capital that didn't ask uncomfortable questions, they needed someone whose name, on its own, meant the money was clean enough to sleep at night. That someone was me. Long before I was ever Mrs. Kang, I was Naima Vale, and men twice my age had learned to return my calls the same day. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this because you need to understand exactly what he had, so that later you understand exactly what he lost. Let me give you one memory before I move forward, because I want you to see the marriage before you see the wreckage of it. 2 years into our marriage, Crown Meridian was closing a $110 million refinancing deal in Singapore, and 40 minutes before signature, the lead bank's legal team froze the entire transaction over a discrepancy in one of the shell entity's beneficial ownership disclosures, the kind of clerical landmine that kills deals for lesser companies every single day. Jihoon was in the room, pale, watching 4 years of his father's planning evaporate in real time. I was on a conference line from our hotel suite in my robe, hair still wet, and I walked the bank's legal team through the ownership structure, line by line from memory, because I had built half of it myself years earlier at Voss Sterling. The deal closed 19 minutes before the wire deadline. That night, Jihoon held my face in both hands like I had personally saved his family's name from ruin. Because I had, and he told me I remember this exactly. I don't know what this company would be without you. I believed him. For 4 more years, I had no reason not to. I tell you that not because I want your pity for the woman who believed it. I tell you it so that later, when he tells you, tells his uncle, tells the room, tells himself that everyone at his level is replaceable, you understand precisely how much of a lie that was and how long he had personally known it. The morning this story really begins, I was in my glass-walled office on the 41st floor, reviewing certification paperwork for the flagship property, the Meridian Chicago, 5-diamond rated, the crown jewel that had Jihoon's father's name etched into the cornerstone before he passed the whole empire to his only son. My phone lit up with a text from my husband. Dinner will be late tonight. Bored thing. Don't wait up. I didn't think anything of it. That was my first mistake. If you want to call it that, though, later, I would understand it wasn't a mistake at all. It was simply the last ordinary day before I started paying attention to something I had been too loyal to look at directly. Let me tell you about my best friend, Odessa Monroe, because you are going to need her, the way I needed her, before this is over. Des ran an event styling company 2 floors down from my office in the same building and accident of real estate that became the best friendship of my adult life. She was loud in the way that made rooms brighter instead of smaller. She had opinions about everything from cufflinks to casket flowers, and she had zero patience for anyone who tried to make herself small to fit someone else's ego. Des had built her entire styling company on a philosophy she repeated to every stressed-out bride who walked into her studio. I cannot fix your fiancé, ma'am. I can only fix your centerpieces. Please manage your expectations. She had personally uninvited a groomsman from a wedding for showing up drunk to the rehearsal, had once talked a hysterical mother of the bride off a literal ledge metaphorically. She was always careful to clarify, though she told the story like it hadn't been, and had exactly one unbreakable rule in life. She did not do subtle. If Des had an opinion, you were going to hear the entire opinion, in full, usually before you'd finished asking the question. You look like a woman whose husband just texted her something insulting and called it normal, Des said, dropping into the chair across from my desk with 2 coffees, sliding one to me without asking if I wanted it. He said, "Don't wait up. That's not insulting. Naima, baby, I have been doing weddings for 9 years. Don't wait up from a man who used to text you the moment he landed from Seoul just to say he missed your voice. That's not a schedule update. That's a translation problem. Someone needs to translate what he actually means, and I am fluent in man who is about to ruin his life." I laughed because that was what Des was for. I did not, at the time, think she was right. 6 years of a good marriage does something to your instincts. It dulls the alarm bells on purpose, because you've decided the person on the other end of every late text has earned your trust. I had built my entire professional life on reading risk in other people's businesses. I had somehow convinced myself I didn't need to read it in my own home. I want to be fair to the woman I was that Tuesday. She was not foolish. She was simply generous with a man who had stopped earning it and did not yet have the receipts to prove it to herself. The receipts came slowly, the way water finds a crack in a foundation, not all at once, just steadily, until one day you look down and the whole floor is soft. It started with a name that kept appearing in emails I wasn't supposed to see but did, because compliance sees everything. Bree Sinclair, newly hired as Director of Brand Experience for the Meridian properties. I looked her up out of professional habit before I ever looked her up out of suspicion. She had built a following posting party content from Miami and Vegas. No hospitality background, no operations experience, nothing on paper that explained a 6-figure title at a 5-diamond property, except one line item in the hiring memo, initialed by Jihoon himself, that read, "Personal recommendation." I raised it in a leadership meeting the way I raised everything professionally, without heat. I'd like to understand the vetting process for this hire. Brand experience touches guest data and vendor contracts. That's inside my scope. Jihoon didn't even look up from his phone. "She's fine, Naima. Not everything needs a risk memo. 6 years earlier, that would have been a joke between us. That Tuesday, it landed like something else, though I still couldn't name what." The first time I felt the ground genuinely shift under me was at a small dinner party we hosted for 2 of the family's oldest allies. The kind of evening where seating charts mattered, and I had spent a week making sure every detail signaled exactly the right amount of old money confidence. Bree arrived uninvited by me, invited by Jihoon, a detail I only learned when she walked through my own front door in heels louder than her laugh and proceeded to correct me, in front of 6 guests, about a vendor relationship I had personally managed for 3 years. "I actually think Naima might be thinking of the old contract," she said, touching Jihoon's forearm like she was steadying herself instead of staking a claim. "We restructured that whole relationship last quarter, didn't we? Gee. I remember that detail specifically because in 6 years of marriage I had never once heard anyone shorten his name like that, and he did not correct her. He smiled instead, the small private smile of a man enjoying being fought over, and said, "She's not wrong, actually. Bree's been really on top of the vendor side." I said nothing that night because 6 years of composure does not simply switch off because your husband smiles at another woman correcting you at your own dinner table. But I noticed. I noticed the way his hand found the small of her back when he thought I was occupied with a guest. I noticed the way he laughed at things she said that weren't clever, the the specific, over-loud laugh of a man performing delight for an audience of one. I noticed, and I filed it, the way I filed everything. And I told myself the way loyal women have told themselves for as long as there have been loyal women that it was nothing, that it would pass, that 6 years of a good foundation could absorb one careless season. Des named what I was actually watching 3 weeks later, over lunch, when she casually mentioned that her cousin did makeup for an event at the Meridian rooftop and had watched Jihoon Kang stand entirely too close to entirely too glossy a director of brand experience for entirely too long, laughing at something that apparently was not that funny. "I'm just saying," Des said, stabbing a piece of salmon like it had personally wronged her. "If my husband stood that close to a woman wearing a dress that cost less than her lip filler, I would need him to explain the physics of it to me in writing." "You don't have a husband, Des." "Exactly. Because I have standards and eyes. Use yours. I used them." That's the part I want you to understand, because the composure you're about to watch me hold on to for the rest of this story was never about not seeing. It was about deciding, deliberately, what I would do with what I saw and when. What I saw, over the following 2 months, was a slow redistribution of my husband's attention that had nothing to do with the business and everything to do with a woman who laughed at things that weren't funny and touched his arm in meetings that weren't hers to be in. What I did not see, what I genuinely did not anticipate, because even after 11 years of reading other people's businesses for a living, I still believed my own marriage deserved the benefit of the doubt, was how public he would eventually decide to make it. Our 6th wedding anniversary fell on the same weekend as the Meridian Chicago's annual Investor Gala, an event I had built from scratch 4 years earlier, specifically because it let us present the family's business health directly to the people whose money kept the lights on private bankers from 3 continents, the family council elders who still, technically, had to bless every major expansion. And the kind of press that only gets invited when a company wants a story told a certain way. I wore emerald. Jihoon had given me the dress 2 years earlier for a trip to Seoul, and I chose it that night on purpose, because some quiet, hopeful part of me still believed the man who picked it out for me existed somewhere inside the one who'd been distracted for months. I did my own hair. I did not need help to look like exactly what I was, the woman who had spent 6 years making sure this family's name meant something in rooms that did not forgive sloppiness. The elders were seated at the head table. Jihoon's uncle, Elder Young-chul Kang, the closest thing the family had to a conscience, nodded at me the way he always did with something close to real respect, the kind he rationed carefully and had never once extended to anyone who married in without earning it. I had earned it. I had earned every ounce of it, which is why what happened at 9:40 that evening did not simply hurt. It was designed to hurt, whether or not Jihoon understood, in the moment, that design at all. He stood to give the toast I had written the outline for 2 years, running a toast about family, continuity, the next chapter of Crown Meridian. He deviated from it in the second sentence. "Tonight, I also want to formally welcome someone who's already become essential to where this company is going," he said. And I watched Bree Sinclair rise from a table that should not have had her name card on it, in a dress that cost less than the flowers on the table she was seated at, smiling the practiced smile of someone who had rehearsed this moment more than she'd rehearsed her actual job. Bree is stepping into an expanded role, Vice President of Brand Experience, effective tonight. I kept my face still. I want you to notice that, because it is the only armor I had left in that moment, and I wore it perfectly. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, and my stomach understood before my mind did. He took out the jade seal. I need you to understand what that seal meant, because to anyone who wasn't raised inside a family like the Kangs, it looked like a piece of decorative stone, a family heirloom, nothing more. To everyone at that table who mattered, it was the single most literal symbol of institutional trust the family possessed, carved 3 generations ago, used to authorize every major transaction that required the family's true blessing rather than a mere signature, held for the last 4 years by exactly one person outside the bloodline, me. Whoever held that seal held the family's word. I had held it since the year Jihoon's father died, and the family needed someone the banks would trust without question. Someone whose reputation could vouch for a fortune built, in part, on things that could not survive a hard look. Since Bree will be handling all activations and partner-facing events going forward, Jihoon said, holding the jade seal out toward her across the head table in front of 40 of the most powerful financiers and family elders on 3 continents, she should have this. Bree took it in both hands like it was a trophy she'd been promised. She had no idea what it meant. That, somehow, made it worse. He had not just replaced me. He had handed the most sacred object his family owned to a woman who thought it was jewelry. In front of the one man in the room, his uncle who had spent 4 years watching me be the reason that Seal never once had to be questioned by a bank, a regulator, or an ally. If you have ever felt the specific, silent violence of being humiliated in a room full of people who are too polite to react, tell me where you're watching this from right now. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this traveled tonight, because it traveled through every single person at that table, and every one of them looked at their plates instead of at me. I did not cry. I did not stand up. I finished my glass of wine, slowly. The way I had learned to do everything that mattered without giving anyone the satisfaction of watching it cost me something. Elder Jihoon Kang was the only person who looked directly at me. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. In his eyes, I saw something I would come to understand much later was the first crack in his faith in his nephew, and I filed it away, quietly, the way I filed everything. Later, in the car, Jihoon was already scrolling through something on his phone, half smiling at whatever it said. "You handled that well," he said, not looking up, as though I had passed some kind of test. "Handled what, Jihoon? Don't make this bigger than it is." Bree needed the visibility. It's optics. You know how this business works better than anyone. "I built how this business works," I said, and my voice did not shake, though something behind my ribs had started to. He finally looked at me, and what I saw in his face wasn't guilt. It was mild irritation, the specific look of a man being asked to explain something he'd already decided didn't require an explanation. "Everyone at this level is replaceable, Naima. That's just business. I need you to not make it emotional. I want you to remember those words. Everyone at this level is replaceable. Write them down if you have to. We are going to come back to them. And when we do, I want you to feel exactly what I felt hearing them for the first time. Not rage, not yet. Something colder. Something with a very long memory." I said nothing else that night. When we got home, I hung the emerald dress in the closet, took off my ring, and set it on the kitchen counter, where he would find it when he finally noticed I was gone. Not thrown, not dramatic, simply set down, the way you set down something that used to belong to a version of your life that no longer existed. I called Des at 11:40 at night. She picked up on the first ring, already half shouting before I said a word. I already heard. My cousin's friend was at that gala doing hair for the Whitfield family and texted me a play-by-play before you even got in the car. "Girl! Girl! I am coming over and I am bringing tequila and a list." "A list of what?" "Petty revenge ideas, obviously, ranked by how likely they are to get you arrested." 20 minutes later, Des was in my kitchen in her pajamas, pouring 2 glasses of something with real conviction, reading options off her phone like a woman presenting quarterly earnings. Option 1. Send Bree Sinclair a fruit basket that says, "Congratulations on your promotion. Sweetie, hope you know how to read a balance sheet, because that's the only thing keeping this company's lights on, and it is not going to be you." Option 2. I know a florist. I could get congratulations spelled out in flowers that die within 6 hours, delivered to her new office, symbolism free of charge. Option 3. My personal favorite. Nothing. You do nothing. You let his own arrogance be the wrecking ball, because baby, I watched that man's face tonight, and he genuinely believes his name is the only reason that company works. He's about to find out otherwise, and he doesn't even know it's coming. "You think I should do nothing?" "I think," Des said, suddenly serious in the way she only got maybe twice a year, "that you have spent 4 years being the reason nothing bad ever happens to that family, and he just found out the hard way what it looks like when you stop protecting him from himself. You don't need a list, Naima. You need a resignation letter and a good lawyer for your own consulting practice, because you are about to become the most expensive lesson that man ever learns, and I plan to sell tickets." I laughed until I cried that night, the good kind of crying, the kind that clears something out instead of adding to the weight. And then, When Des finally fell asleep on my couch at 2 in the morning, still fully dressed with her shoes on, I sat at my kitchen table and I wrote the letter. It was 2 paragraphs. It thanked the board for 4 years of partnership. It cited personal reasons. It was effective immediately, per the 90-day notice clause in my contract, which I waived on their behalf as a professional courtesy, because I did not need 90 days of goodwill from people who had just watched a jade seal get handed to a woman who couldn't have told you what a KYC filing was. I did not mention the 22 active compliance certifications that required my personal signature to renew. I did not mention the private bank in Singapore that had extended Crown Meridian's international credit line specifically because their compliance officer, a woman named Mei Ling Zhou, had been my colleague for 11 years and trusted my name on a filing more than she trusted most audited statements. I did not mention Whitfield Capital, the family office that had structured their $140 million investment in the Meridian Chicago expansion with a specific covenant requiring a qualified independent risk officer to remain in place as a condition of continued capital calls, a covenant they had insisted on, and that I had personally negotiated because Richard Whitfield had told me over dinner 3 years earlier that he did not invest in families, he invested in whoever kept the family honest. I simply resigned. Quietly, professionally, the way I did everything. I want to be honest with you about something. I did not resign as an act of revenge. I resigned because I could no longer do a job that required me to protect a man who had just shown me, in a room full of witnesses, exactly how little that protection meant to him. The fact that removing myself also removed the single most load-bearing pillar of the entire company's international credibility was not my plan. It was simply the truth. And the truth, once you stop holding it up on your own back, has a way of falling exactly where it was always going to land. 3 weeks passed before the first crack showed. I know this because Des told me, because Des knew everyone, and everyone loved telling Des things. So, she said, sliding into the booth at our usual lunch spot with the specific energy of a woman who has been sitting on gossip for exactly as long as she could stand it. Guess whose liquor license renewal for the Meridian Chicago just got flagged by the state board for missing a compliance officer's certification signature? I hadn't thought about it, honestly, not consciously. But of course, my signature had been on that filing every year for 4 years. Nobody else at Crown Meridian held the credentials the board required. How do you know that? Because my cousin's boyfriend works at the county clerk's office, and he thinks it's the funniest thing he's heard all year. And also because I asked, obviously, the second I heard your name wasn't attached to anything Meridian-related anymore. I have been checking, Naima. I check like it's a hobby now. A month after that, Mei Ling Zhou called me directly, in Singapore, at an hour that told me she'd stayed up specifically to make the call. I have to ask you something, and I need you to understand I'm asking as a friend before I ask as anything else, she said. Are you still with Crown Meridian in any capacity? No. I resigned last month. There was a pause I understood completely. Then I need to inform the credit committee that the relationship needs to be reviewed. I can't extend that line on the strength of a name I no longer have direct confidence in. I'm sorry, Naima. This isn't about you. I know, I said, and I meant it because it wasn't about me at all. It was about what happens to a fortune built partly on trust when the person holding that trust together simply stops holding it. Somewhere in that same stretch of weeks, a reporter named Priya Anand, who covered hospitality finance for a trade publication half the industry pretended not to read religiously, called my cell directly. I'm working on a piece about the leadership changes at Crown Meridian, she said, careful and professional in the way good reporters are when they already know more than they're saying. I understand you were the company's longtime head of risk and compliance. I'd love to get a quote about your departure, or about the certification issues that have come up since. I want you to notice what I did with that call, because it tells you everything about the difference between me and the people who wronged me. I did not use it. I did not hand a journalist a single sentence that could be printed as bitterness dressed up as fact. I have nothing but respect for the work I did there, I told her, and every word of it was true. I wish the company well. I'm focused on my own practice now. Priya thanked me, clearly a little disappointed, and the piece she eventually ran was built entirely out of public filings, anonymous industry sources, and the simple, undeniable math of evaluation that had cratered within a year of one departure. I didn't need to say a single unkind word about Jihoon Kang. The numbers said all of it for me, in a font size I never could have gotten away with using myself. Richard Whitfield called 2 weeks after that, and this one I did take some private, quiet satisfaction in, though I kept my voice as even as I kept everything else. Naima, I heard you left Crown Meridian. I did. The covenant in our agreement requires a qualified independent risk officer to remain in place for continued capital calls. Jihoon's telling my team it's a formality, that they'll have someone new certified within the quarter. That's between you and Crown Meridian, Richard. It's between me and whoever I trust to keep my $140 million honest, he said. And right now, that's not anyone with the Kang name on their badge, it's you. So I have a business proposition when you're ready to hear it. I wasn't ready that week, but I filed it away, the way I filed everything. The call I did not expect came from Elder Jihoon Kang himself, 2 months after the gala, in the careful, formal English he reserved for conversations he considered important enough not to leave room for misunderstanding. Naima, I hope I'm not overstepping by calling you directly. You could never overstep with me, Elder Kang. You know that. A long pause, the kind that told me he was choosing every word the way you choose words you intend to be remembered exactly as spoken. I have watched this family's fortune for 40 years. I have watched people marry into it for money, for status, for a name that opens doors. I have never, in 40 years, watched someone marry into it and then quietly become the reason the doors stayed open at all. I did not say anything that night, at the gala. I want you to know that my silence was not agreement. It was simply not my place, yet, to correct my nephew in front of the very people whose trust he was busy spending. I have corrected him since, in rooms he cannot walk out of. I wanted you to hear that from me directly, and not from whatever version of it eventually reaches you second-hand. I did not cry on that call either, though it was closer than it had been in months. Thank you, Elder Kang. That means more than you probably realize. I also wanted to ask, he continued, and here his voice shifted into something more businesslike, whether your new practice takes on family offices as clients. Not Crown Meridian. My own personal holdings, and several of the other elders, separate from anything my nephew touches. We would like our name attached to someone who has actually earned the right to hold it. I said yes. Of course I said yes. It was, I will admit, one of the more satisfying signatures of my professional life, not because it wounded Jihoon, though it did, but because it was the family's most senior member formally choosing competence over blood, in writing, on my own letterhead. Here is the part I want you to sit with, because it is the turning point of everything that follows, and I need you to feel it the way I felt it. 6 weeks after the gala, Jihoon called me. Not a text. A call at 9 at night, his voice doing the thing it used to do when he was trying to sound casual about something that wasn't casual at all. Hey, I know things have been weird, but I need a favor. There's a few compliance things that got flagged, probably just paperwork, and I was hoping you could just look them over. Quietly, as a friend, 6 years of marriage, reduced, in his own mouth, to a favor he thought he was still owed. Everyone at this level is replaceable. Jihoon, I said, using his own words back to him for the first time, quietly, without cruelty, just fact. That's just business. I need you to not make this emotional. He was silent for a long moment. That's not fair. No, I agreed. It isn't. It also isn't my problem anymore. If those words landed anywhere in your chest, the way they landed in mine when I finally said them out loud, I want you to drop the word queen in the comments right now, because that is exactly what it felt like. Not victory, not yet, just the first moment I understood I had already survived the worst part. I hung up, and for the first time in 6 weeks, I slept the entire night without waking up once. The following months, I built. I want to tell you about that, because this story is not only about what happened to him, it's about what I did with the 11 years of expertise nobody in that family ever fully credited as mine alone. I started Vale Standard Advisory out of a converted studio 2 floors above Dess's event company, with exactly one client mailing Zhou's bank, which needed an outside compliance consultant for 3 of its hospitality sector accounts, and trusted no one more than the woman whose name they'd trusted for 11 years. Within 5 months, I had 14 clients. Within 7, I had a wait list. Richard Whitfield became my second client, then my most vocal reference, telling anyone who'd listen at every industry dinner in Chicago that the smartest thing Jihoon Kang ever did was lose me, because it made me available to everyone else. I remember the first day I opened the studio above Des's office, one folding table, a second-hand leather chair I'd bought from an estate sale because it reminded me of the one in my old 41st floor office, and a single framed print on the wall that said nothing because I hadn't decided yet who I wanted to be without someone else's name attached to mine. Mei Ling's first contract came through on day 4. Des brought champagne on day 5, poured it into 2 mismatched mugs because I hadn't unpacked actual glassware yet, and made me toast to myself out loud, which I resisted until she refused to let me drink otherwise. To Naima Vale, she said, holding her mug up like it was crystal, who built an entire fortune's worth of trust for somebody else's name and is now about to build twice that for her own, and this time nobody gets to put their initials on the hiring memo. By the 3rd month, I'd hired my first associate, a sharp young analyst named Callum Reyes, who'd left a Big 4 firm specifically because he'd heard I didn't waste people's time in meetings. By the 5th month, the folding table was gone, replaced by a proper office, 2 floors up with my own name on the door in letters I'd chosen myself, no one else's approval required. I want you to notice that detail, because it matters more than the money did. For 6 years, my name had been a footnote on someone else's letterhead. On my own door, it was the whole sentence. I would like to tell you I didn't enjoy the irony. I would be lying. Des, meanwhile, had appointed herself my unofficial director of intelligence, and it was Des who called me on a Thursday afternoon, practically vibrating. Okay, I need you to sit down. I was doing florals for an event at Halcyon Hospitality's downtown office, you know, the rival group that's been circling Crown Meridian's investor list for 2 years, and guess who I saw walking out of a private meeting with their CEO, looking extremely comfortable for someone who supposedly works for the Kangs? Bree. Bree, in a blazer I have personally seen on 3 separate influencer PR packages, looking like she was closing a deal, not attending one. Naima. I think your husband's little brand experience director has been feeding Halcyon inside information on Meridian's investor relationships this entire time. That's not an affair. That's corporate espionage with extra steps and worse highlights. I want to be careful here, because I never confirmed every detail of that with hard proof of my own. I wasn't inside Crown Meridian anymore, and I had no interest in becoming a private investigator for a man who'd handed away the one thing I actually built. But I will tell you what became public knowledge over the following 2 months, because it was reported in every hospitality trade publication in the country. Halcyon Hospitality poached 2 of Crown Meridian's largest investor relationships within the same quarter. Bree Sinclair suddenly, quietly, stopped showing up at Meridian Properties altogether. I saw her once myself, before the whole thing became public knowledge, a chance collision at a restaurant downtown, the kind of coincidence Chicago insists on producing at exactly the wrong moment. Bree was seated at the bar alone, scrolling her phone with the specific brittle posture of someone whose calls had recently stopped being returned as quickly as they used to be. She saw me before I could decide whether to pretend I hadn't seen her. Naima. She said my name like it cost her something to say it evenly. I guess you heard. I hear a lot of things, Bree. I try not to collect all of them. I didn't plan for any of this to happen the way it did, she said. And there was something almost convincing in it, if you didn't already know exactly what she'd been doing in Halcyon's downtown office in a blazer that wasn't hers to wear. Jihoon made it sound like the 2 of you were already basically over. He tells everyone what makes the room easiest for him, I said. That's not new information. I'd have thought you'd have noticed that about him by now, being that you're the one currently finding out what happens when the room stops being easy. I didn't wait for her answer. I didn't need one. I paid for my own drink, left a tip generous enough that the bartender would remember me kindly, and walked out into a Chicago evening that felt, for the first time in months, entirely mine. Karma, it turns out, does not need my help. It only needed time, and a company that had spent 4 years mistaking one woman's competence for its own foundation. By the 10-month mark, the story had become impossible for the industry to ignore. The Meridian Chicago lost its 5-diamond rating after 2 consecutive quarters of failed compliance reviews. Whitfield Capital formally withdrew from the tower expansion, citing the unmet risk officer covenant, and their exit triggered 2 smaller family offices to pull out behind them within the same month. Crown Meridian's internal valuation, according to the same trade publication that once ran a glowing profile of Jihoon as hospitality's brightest young heir, had fallen from roughly $380 million to just above $50 million in under a year. Elder Jihoon Kang, I heard, called an emergency council meeting. He told me himself, weeks later, over coffee at my own new office, what that meeting had actually looked like. 12 family members around a table that had settled disputes for 3 generations, a single ledger printed and passed hand to hand, showing the valuation collapse in plain black numbers, no raised voices, no shouting, nothing so undignified as an argument, just a slow, unanimous vote, conducted the way that family conducted everything that mattered, quietly and completely. Jihoon Kang, Jihoon's cousin, who had spent a decade running the family's sole properties without a single headline to her name, the highest compliment that world has to offer, was asked if she would take the chair. She said yes before the elder had finished the sentence. Jihoon, I was told, did not object. There was, by that point, nothing left to object with. The numbers had already made every argument for the family, days before that room ever convened. Jihoon kept his name. He kept his last name, his bloodline, his seat at family dinners, if his uncle still allowed him one. He did not keep his signing authority, his corner office, or, as I heard later, his mistress who left, according to Des's endlessly reliable network, within a week of his cards being publicly declined at a restaurant he used to own a piece of. I did not celebrate when I heard that. I want to be honest with you about that too. I felt something quieter, a kind of settling, the sense of a debt finally being paid by the universe instead of by me. I bought my penthouse 8 months after I left Crown Meridian, with money I earned entirely on my own name, on the 32nd floor of a building 3 blocks from the one I used to share with a man who thought I was replaceable. Floor-to-ceiling glass. A terrace with a view of the same skyline that used to belong to his family's Crown Jewel Hotel, which I could now see. Every night, lit up a little dimmer than it used to be. Des, for her part, considered the entire collapse a personal vindication of her original list. I want it noted for the record, she announced one Sunday over brunch, holding up her phone like she was presenting evidence in a trial, only she had been preparing for. That option 3 on my very first list, do nothing. Let his ego handle it, has now outperformed every other petty revenge strategy in the history of petty revenge strategies, and I would like a small plaque made, just something modest. Odessa Monroe, correctly predicted everything. March. I'll pay for it myself. I just want it acknowledged publicly, ideally at your next major professional milestone, ideally with a microphone. You can have the plaque, Des. I want the plaque and an open bar. You can have both. Then my work here, she said, saluting me with a mimosa, is spiritually, professionally, and financially complete. I want to bring you back to where we started, because we are almost there now. It was a Thursday night, raining the way Chicago rains in early spring hard, sideways, unrelenting. I had cooked myself dinner because I had learned, in the year since that gala, that I did not need an audience to make an evening feel worth having. I was halfway through my glass of wine when I heard it, a fist against the glass of my terrace door. I did not startle. Some part of me, I think, had been waiting for this exact moment for months, the way you wait for a debt you know is owed. Jihoon stood there, soaked to the skin, his hair plastered flat, his mouth already shaping an apology before I'd even opened the door. Beside him, holding onto his sleeve like it was the last dry thing left in the city, was Bree Sinclair, mascara running in exactly the theatrical way you'd expect from a woman who had built her entire identity on being photographed. I opened the door only enough to let the sound of the rain in, not enough to let either of them out of it. Naima. Please, I need to talk to you, Jihoon said, and his voice had none of the casual, careless confidence it carried the night he handed away a 3-generation family seal like a party favor. Everything's gone. The company, the Naima. They took everything. My uncle won't even take my calls. I know, I said, and I want you to hear how calm my voice was, because it had taken me a year to earn that calm, and I was not going to give it away now. Everyone at this level is replaceable, Jihoon. That's just business. I need you to not make this emotional. His face did something I had genuinely never seen it do in 6 years of marriage. It broke. Bree tried a different approach, her voice pitching high and desperate over the rain. Please, it's freezing. We just need somewhere to stay for one night. We don't have anywhere. You have a blazer from Halcyon Hospitality that says otherwise, I said, and watched her mouth actually fall open, because apparently she had believed no one outside that betrayal had been paying attention. Everyone had been paying attention. That was the part neither of them had ever understood about me, that composure was never the same thing as not noticing. That was just a meeting. That doesn't mean Bree started. And I watched her realize, in real time, that she had no ending for that sentence that made her sound like anything other than exactly what she was. Jihoon tried again, his voice cracking in a way I had genuinely never heard it crack in 6 years, not even the night his father died. Naima, I know I don't deserve this. I know that. But you're the only person who's ever actually known how to fix things. Please, I'm asking you as I'm asking you as my wife. I stopped being your wife the moment you decided I was replaceable in front of 40 people who used to respect me, I said. You can't reach backward for a title you spent an entire evening throwing away, Jihoon. That's not how any of this works, and you, of all people, used to understand exactly how things work. He pressed his palm flat against the glass again, like the gesture itself might make the door open through sheer repetition. Water running down his wrist, off his fingers, onto the stone terrace at his feet. Please. Just for tonight, I thought, for one strange, quiet second, about the version of me who used to set his cufflinks every morning because it felt like devotion instead of a chore. I let her go, gently, the way you let go of a coat you've outgrown. You didn't make a mistake, Jihoon, I said finally. A mistake is something you don't see coming. You saw me. You saw exactly what I was worth, every single day for 6 years, and you decided, out loud, in front of your own family, that I was replaceable. I'm not going to spend tonight teaching you the difference between an accident and a choice. You made a choice. Live in it. I closed the door. Not hard. Not dramatically. Just firmly, the way you close a door on a chapter that has already, quietly, finished writing itself. Through the glass, I watched him stand there for another moment, his hand pressed flat against the pane, the way you'd press your hand against something you were trying to hold onto that was already gone. Then I turned around, walked back to my table, and finished my wine. Des sat down across from me a moment later, pouring herself a glass without asking, the way she always did. You good? I'm better than good, I said, and meant it, fully, for the first time since that gala. I'm home. Des glanced toward the terrace door, where the rain was still hammering the glass, the shapes of both of them finally moving off into the wet dark beyond the reach of my terrace light. You know, she said, refilling both our glasses. A year ago, if you'd told me this exact scene was coming, him standing in the rain, begging, and you not even getting up from the table, I would have said you were writing fiction. I used to think so too, I said. For 6 years, I thought loyalty was the whole job. Nobody tells you that loyalty without reciprocity isn't a virtue. It's just a debt you keep paying to someone who stopped keeping the books a long time before you noticed. Deep, Des said, raising her glass. Very deep. Write that down. Put it on a mug. Sell it to every woman who's ever set a man's cufflinks out like it was a personality. I laughed. Really laughed. The kind that comes from somewhere lower than your throat, and for the first time since the gala, I understood something I hadn't let myself say out loud until that exact moment. I did not miss him. I missed, briefly, the woman I had been before I learned what he actually thought I was worth, but I did not miss him. Not even a little, not even soaked and broken on the wrong side of my glass door. What I felt instead, sitting in my own home, on my own money, with my own name on the door 2 floors below, and my best friend refilling my glass without being asked, was something closer to a rival than victory. I had not won a war against him. I had simply, finally, stopped fighting for a seat at a table that was never going to set a place for the whole of me. Here is what I want you to carry with you when this story ends, because I did not build this life to be a revenge story. I built it to be a proof. The proof that the woman who holds a room together, who holds a family's name together, who holds a whole fortune's worth of trust together, with nothing but her own competence and her own quiet dignity, does not need anyone's title to prove her worth. She only needs time, and the discipline to walk away instead of begging to be seen by someone who already decided not to look. If you stayed with me this entire story, all the way to this door, all the way through that rain. I need you to understand something, and I'm not going to pretend I don't mean it personally. Stories like this take everything out of me to build for you, scene by scene, so that somewhere, some woman watching this at 11 at night after a night that felt exactly like mine feels a little less alone in it. If this reached you, if any single part of tonight's story felt like it was written about your life instead of mine, please don't scroll past it in silence. Comment ISEEHER before you go, so I know this landed somewhere real and not into nothing. Subscribe, so the next woman like me never goes untold. And send this to the one friend who needs to hear, tonight, that walking away from a man who calls you replaceable is not losing your crown. It is how you finally get to wear it on your own terms.